Hey everyone, it's Scoopman 5000 here. We're back for another video, and we got to talk because over the weekend it was New York Toy Fair, and what came out, the news is either very sad news or some very good news, depending on which side of the fence you fall on. But Mattel has regained the master license for DC action figures and toys, and what that means is the cornerstone of this channel, McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, seemingly no longer after middle of 2026. So we got about a year and some change left for these Todd DC figures. Now, when I first heard that news, it's like somebody died. Like, I don't even know how to think. I just didn't expect, it seemed like things were just going to keep going, especially the way that Todd releases figures, right? It's slow. You'll get a Wonder Woman here, you'll get a Power Girl here. But it seems like we're kind of building rosters slowly, and it's random releases. You do that if you're long-term, right? But now we got a year left. We got to get some heavy hitters out there. There's a hawkgirl on the way I'm excited about. But that brings us to Mattel, right? And I mean, you can see behind me, my other primary collection is Mattel WWE figures, but I also have a good handful of the previous Mattel classics, Multiverse, Batman Unlimited, and that's what this video is going to be about. So I'll start this off by saying I don't think it's a fair comparison because these are Mattel figures from mostly like a decade ago. We're going to have to see what a 2026 Mattel brings to the table. If they're even going to still be 6-inch or if they're going to continue this line, 7-inch, and even they could buy the molds from McFarlane. Things like that happen. But for the sake of conversation, we're going to look at these Mattel figures. I've pulled out from my smaller Mattel collection figures that I own, both a McFarlane and a Mattel, that I tried to get as one-to-one as possible. So without further ado, we're going to flip it around, we're going to take a look, and we're going to compare both companies. Now, what I want to do actually is start out with a comparison I've seen that I don't think is valid, and that's comparing this late released Batman 89 inspired figure with this Batman 89 McFarlane. Because when I say inspired, this Mattel figure is really more based on the toys, the feel of the Kenner action figures. So it's a vintage inspired head sculpt. It's not really intending to look like Michael Keaton more than it's intending to look like a vintage toy. And what I'll say too is that this figure, I did just review it, this is the one that comes with the wing. It has its problems too, mainly in the neck area. This should be thicker. He really even shouldn't have neck articulation. That being said, what I do think is a better comparison, let's get these guys out. A Batman Unlimited Penguin, and then this is the collector's edition. Now, what these are both exactly is a mainline Penguin release, repainted to look like the vintage toy. This one might be the toughest comparison we look at. I love both of these figures, but I think I got to give the head sculpt here to Mattel. I think they're capturing, again, if they're going for that vintage look, what McFarlane does is they texture things up. They try to go a bit more realistic even on the comic head sculpts, right? You could see the difference in texturing. What McFarlane didn't do is pinstripe the pants. They tend to skip on paint. Now, again, if you want to go cinematic, how about BVS Batman, my favorite? Now, I don't think either company did this figure justice, the Ben Affleck version of Batman. Mattel did come out with a similar figure in the Justice League wave, but there's not exactly the same suit, but it is improved. The eyes look better. It's got a darker finish. Now, McFarlane did make a Justice League version that does look a lot better, but this is a more recent figure, right? So things to think about there. Going back to these vintage style figures, one that we didn't ever get from McFarlane is Poison Ivy. Now, we got the Uma Thurman version, which I don't think Mattel ever made, but that's a problem with McFarlane's line, is that we never got these classic characters. So when all is said and done, odds are we're still going to have some pretty big gaps in Batman's rogues, Flash's rogues, certain Justice League members. We do have a hawkgirl on the way, that's a huge one, but we're lacking in these female characters. Here's Jessica Cruz. This is a really late Mattel figure right here. Again, before all said and done, this is probably my highest, most wanted McFarlane is a Jessica Cruz. Another one here is Artemis. Now, this is Artemis, when she's claimed the Wonder Woman outfit. Now, I don't even have a regular Wonder Woman, but we can compare the bodies here. So you could see, again, with McFarlane, they're adding things like these little panel lines. They're adding more details in the sculpt. The new hotness has been Power Girl, right? We just looked at her on the channel as well. This figure's gigantic. And then we put her next to the Mattel version. Now, I think the head sculpt actually beats McFarlane here, and this is an early Mattel figure. Most of my Mattels, I didn't really collect the Mattels until like Deathbed, and I've only picked up a couple true DCU classics. This is the one that, I found this in a comic shop. So for an older Mattel versus a brand new McFarlane, and I'm going to give it to Mattel on this one, at least, again, in terms of the head sculpting, that what McFarlane has been doing is these wired capes, and for a while McFarlane was doing the sculpted capes too. Then McFarlane experimented with some cloth, right? We got these draping cloth capes. But then Mattel also came in and started giving us cloth capes towards the end too. Another female character here, and this is Batwoman. I think this Batwoman, again, this was like a later Mattel, one of the last few waves. But you could see basically a lot of parts sharing, a lot of soft sculpts so they could reuse it, you know, just paint over the emblems and things like that. And then we get McFarlane's version, and that's where you're getting, you know, these cloth lines, these details. And again, these parts are getting reused too, but there is a big difference in the sculpting quality. You can see where the material stretches there around her chest and around the knees, bat symbol sculpted in. Now the head sculpt here is going to be up to your preference. You know, I could see good things about either one. Another big example of that, this is the Batman Unlimited Zur-NR. This is one of my favorite Mattels, and he does have sculpted details, right? He's got little stitch lines going on the chest there, but mostly reusing other Batman parts. Now we go to Todd's version, and this guy was a totally new sculpt. I think he's barely really been reused ever since. And again, like, this is McFarlane's interpretation. On the figure here, just painted on. This one is sculpted, it's raised, it's textured. So these are things to think about. Again, I don't know if this is a true fair comparison because we don't know what a 2026 Mattel is going to make, but we can look at, you know, 2015 or whatever this is Mattel and try to, you know, guess, speculate. Another late release from Mattel was this Wally West from Rebirth. Rebirth was just kicking off really when Mattel sort of was on its deathbed, and McFarlane picked it up and they made us a really nice Wally West figure. Both of these were just reused parts basically, just with new heads. So the Flash body for McFarlane is going to be defined by this kind of lanky shape and these ribbed texturing lines. You get none of that here on Mattel. Again, all reused parts, all base bodies with painted on line work and logos. You bring it into another late release Mattel, my boy Terry McGinnis. This one's pretty expensive on the aftermarket, and we can compare him to McFarlane's. Now McFarlane came with these jets coming out of his feet here, but we can remove that. McFarlane also did have articulation within the wingsuit, right? But theirs actually wasn't technically removable. You can just pull this thing out, but then you're left with a big hole in the back. But McFarlane, again, raised chest emblem, more details going on the gauntlets. But you could argue Batman Beyond's supposed to be sleek. He's supposed to be simple. We could bring in another cinematic figure. So this one, right? Shazam from the DC Multiverse by Mattel. This was when the movie came out. And at the time, this was innovative, right? A lot of different engineering on this Mattel Shazam. Double elbows going on. The swivel at the center of the waist instead of an ab crunch. So definitely improvements, you know, kind of were being made incrementally at Mattel. But at the same time, like, these figures, when this guy was coming out, you couldn't even really find them on the shelf. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of them showed up at Five Below. That's where I found this guy, Shazam. You know, these are pretty close in quality. But McFarlane, it's a nicer plastic finish. So this might be the closest comparison yet, right? The most fair comparison we can make on the cinematic end. So one of my other favorite Mattels is this armored Batman from The Dark Knight Returns, and this one I think absolutely crushes the McFarlane, but it does show off a big difference. So this Mattel armored Batman is really close to the source material, and that's including how it's colored. What McFarlane does more often than not, again, they're kind of doing their own thing, adding these sculpted details, right? So this is like a pitted metal. So it does share some details and, you know, the overall shapes and idea, but Mattel, when they want to be, can be very comic accurate. So while I think the armored version goes to Mattel, the black and gray to McFarlane. Now again, which head sculpt more accurately reflects Frank Miller? I think this one's a tougher choice. I think somewhere in the middle is where that lies. So this Batman was always called Motu Batman. He reuses a He-Man body from Masters of the Universe Classics, which we could see that crossover with DC again. But I always love this figure. I think it works perfectly for this Frank Miller Batman because it's a reused part, because it's a base body. It is just a muscular body, and it has the logo painted on the top. Todd's version, all kinds of fabric stretching and texture going on here. The emblem raised up on the head sculpt, even the creases in the eyebrow, right? And the teeth, the way the mouth is painted, all these different details, even down to the boots. So again, when you have, you know, these figures on your shelf, which one looks more collectible, more detailed? And is Carrie Kelly one of the sleeper McFarlane figures, I think? I mean, pretty much perfectly executed. And if they are going to do a sculpted cape, McFarlane's always more dynamic. Here's Rebirth Batman, right? And again, this is a tail end of Mattel. McFarlane went in and made a similar figure. I think this is more like Capullo's face, you know, the sculpt there, much more like Capullo's Batman. And again, which one looks better on a shelf? Which one looks less like a toy? And then finally, let's just do a couple more leaguers. So we got Aquaman here, the DC classic from McFarlane Digital. This one from Mattel is based on the Super Friends. So the head sculpt is so the paint is intentionally simple, but this is the main Aquaman body, right, from Mattel. This is McFarlane's Aquaman body. And what they did in the McFarlane case is they sculpted the scales here. And even the legs, they have this seam line. They have a slight texturing to them. And here's another one, right? Hal Jordan, Green Lantern. Now this is a really old Mattel DCUC, one of the first couple waves. But they were using this body for Green Lantern till the end, right? They made a Super Friends version, the same exact sculpt. Now I'm gonna go with Mattel here for the head sculpt. And I mean, this is Hal Jordan all the way. And in this case, right, this body here, we've seen this a lot. This, I think, started with Blue Beetle and Booster Gold. This is the closest thing to like a smooth, soft base body that McFarlane has in their library. So really, this might be the best comparison of the day. And maybe if you just imagine this figure just with better engineering, with double joints, might be what you can expect from Mattel. And finally, let's kick it off with the Man of Steel, the guy who's going to be the focus of DC, at least in 2026. So this is a really early Superman. This is actually the one that comes with the He-Man crossover. But this was, again, the Superman body we had for most of, if not all of, DC Multiverse's existence under Mattel and DC Universe Classics. We take that, and this is a recent release, sort of an update to the Wave 1 Superman. So the Wave 1 version had a sculpted emblem, but you see both of these figures have painted on chest emblems. So here's the McFarlane Superman body and the DC Mattel Superman body. So what is the future of DC, of Mattel DC figures going to look like? You know, again, I mean, Mattel, other than McFarlane DC Multiverse, I collect WWE Elite figures. That's my background. So I love Mattel as a company, even Masters of the Universe, right? I have a bunch of those figures. And these DC, I've collected them before. Again, not seriously, not completist level like I did with McFarlane, but I guess I'm cautiously optimistic, right? What does a 2026 Mattel bring to the table for DC? So, I mean, if this is the end of McFarlane, I mean, we got to say thank you. And even if you have problems with the way McFarlane does things or stylizes things, he brought DC back onto retail shelves and as a brand in the toy space, because it was killed, it was dead. And was this entirely Mattel's fault? Probably not. There was a lot of issues at DC and Warner Brothers, but McFarlane DC Multiverse, I would say, is pretty responsible for like a large portion of DC's successes in the last couple of years, and when they've needed them the most. But I want to know what you guys think. You know, this is going to be a controversial topic and something we're going to be talking about for at least the next year and a half until we get Mattel product in our hands and can truly compare them. But for now, let's look to the past and the current stuff, and let's see what we can create from it. So again, let me know, guys, what do you think about Mattel getting that DC license? See you guys in the next video.